Happy New Year! Lashana Tova. So if you aren't Jewish, you sometimes wonder what's going on here. And if you are Jewish, as am I, you wonder that too, coupled with a swirling, roiling cauldron of so many emotions I'd like to share on the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz, and I'm going to talk about the Jewish New Year from the vantage point of a Jewish guy. Now, first off, what's this 5,787 business? Well, I went to Hebrew school, which I'll talk about in a second. And we were taught, as kind of a foundational precept, that the Jews are news. We are special. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So attention Israel, namely, we're really just talking to ourselves here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. All right? So the big guy, he's ours. He's on our side. We got this. And the Lord is one. So the monotheistic view of the Creator, the omniscient, the omnipotent deity responsible for all of this stuff, including and especially us, is our guy. There's only one of them. And this was an important contrast to make back when polytheism and paganism was more the norm, for better or for worse. If you like Nietzsche, then it was for the better, because he had a multiplicity of norms. But I digress. So you had the Jews with all their complicated history, and they were distinct, as we learned. We were special because we believed in one God, monotheism. And lo and behold, completely random, this one God is our guy. He's our God. Every tribe, every nation, all these peoples on the planet, they had their own gods. Gods, plural, usually. And the singular God, the real God, the only God that counted, was ours. And heads up, Israel, that's the case. That was the DNA of what we were taught in Hebrew school. Now, we also learned that in the year 100, and it was BCE, we didn't say before Christ or AD, Anno Domini, year of our Lord. We religiously used the nomenclature BCE for before the Common Era, and I think CE for Common Era. So the equivalent of the 2nd century CE, so like the year 100, there was this rabbi, Halafta, I think, if memory serves. He wrote something called Seder Reba? Anyway, I should look this up before I rant. The Seder Rabbah. And this guy deconstructed the Torah, the Old Testament, and all the writings, and any kind of historical documentation of the kings and the tribes that was available to him at the time. And he concluded that year one, the year of creation, when God created the whole world in 6 days, resting on the seventh, literally, that coincided to 5,787 years ago from now. And that's how it was. Now, the weirdness of this goes beyond that because the Jewish calendar, much like the Islamic calendar, is based on the moon and not the sun. And since a lunar month, is between 29 and 30 days, a lunar year is about 354 days as opposed to 365 days. So you're missing 11 or so days. Every year they're off. And in order to fix it, the Jews actually have a leap month called, again, if memory serves, Hadar. I think it's Adar. And it's added multiple times in a 19-year cycle. So every 19 years, 7 times, there's a leap month so that the Jewish lunar calendar kind of fits into the conventional Gregorian calendar that we're familiar with now based on the sun. And that's why Rosh Hashanah, the new year today, is September 22nd. And then, last year it might have been a little bit earlier, then it's a little later, but it's all more or less late September, early October. And the Islamic holidays kind of rotate all over the place. That's why it's harder to plan, because they're on the lunar calendar too, but they don't have this leap month business. So it's a double whammy. And to me, it's a reminder of things being very different in the past. Lunar calendar rather than solar, which to me kind of makes sense because, the moon is something you see and it's got its own clock. You know what I mean? You got the new moon to the full moon, back to the new moon. That's pretty easy to measure. And the solar cycle, the Earth around the sun, as we've come to know it to be true, is tougher to measure and it's of longer duration. It's kind of like your religion is based on your mom, not your dad, because you could be pretty sure who your mom is. Maybe that's stretching stuff, but you get what I mean. It's like you could be pretty sure about the lunar cycle, and it doesn't take much. The solar cycle is more complicated, but obviously the solar cycle makes more sense. The Earth going around the sun, or as they thought, the sun around the Earth. But again, I digress. So we've got the year 5,787. Booyah. And this evening is the first night of Rosh Hashanah. So if you're living in Israel, there's only one night. And if you're out of Israel, there's two. That's just how it is. So as Jews, we're reminded, even with our holidays, whether or not we dwell in the promised land, which is what we were taught we would eventually get back to. So if you're not in Israel, you're literally living in the diaspora. You have lost your home, and there's all this potential energy, and we're reminded of it, even for holidays. Well, millions of Jews today are doing the New Year Light. To give a little bit more context, you have Rosh Hashanah, which literally means the head of the year. Rosh is head. Ha is the, if memory serves. And Shana is year. So the head of the year is a 2-day holiday, which is taken very seriously by Jews. Jews have a lot of holidays. So if you know any Orthodox Jews, their schedule bursts with never-ending holidays and duties and rituals. And as we become increasingly assimilated in the various lands, we've lightened the load. But as holidays go, of the multitude of them, Rosh Hashanah / Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Yom means day and Kippur means atonement, if memory serves. This 10-11 day stretch is the most sacred span of the year for Jews worldwide. They take this holiday the most seriously. So the initial salvo, Rosh Hashanah, lasting a day or two, depending where you are, initiates it. There's a 10-day buffer, if you will, between that initiation of the new year and then the number one Jewish holiday, which is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the Day of Atonement is the big one. So if you are an assimilated, non-practicing Jew outside of Israel, or even in Israel for that matter, the one holiday that you will observe, if you observe any of them, is Yom Kippur. Millions of Jews have memberships in synagogues, and they will keep that membership, pay thousands of dollars sometimes for a yearly membership at their synagogue, essentially only for 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is once a year they will go to the synagogue and worship and atone on Yom Kippur, 10 days after Rosh Hashanah, where Rosh Hashanah starts it. You've got 10 days to review all of your sins. And on Yom Kippur, you fast. You don't drink any water. You don't eat anything. You cleanse your body and your mind, and you expiate yourself of the sins of the year. Figure Jews would celebrate the new year by starving themselves and feeling bad about all their sins. And then the next year starts, and then you can start sinning again. But once again, Jews take this holiday so seriously that they'll actually have a membership at a synagogue just so they can go this one day and atone and fast and all that. And many Jews who otherwise don't do anything, they will fast on this day. And the second reason is to send their kids to Hebrew school, which will be the latter part of this rant. Let me get to that in a second. Anyway, we have this holiday that is mismatched with the Gregorian Gentile, as the Jews say, holiday around us, which is consistently December 31st to January 1st, de facto. And we do things differently. Why? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. So we're special. We do it different. This is what we do. And Happy New Year to you if you're Jewish. I've gotten a few Happy New Year messages. And even if you're angry at people, or you're estranged from relatives, or you got sketchy friendships, or you just kind of check in every once in a while, and especially if you're a bosom buddy or a family member, today there are millions of text messages, and animated GIFs and goofy memes and JPEGs wishing our fellow Jews Happy New Year. Even though, technically, the real New Year is Yom Kippur. So this is another kind of weird thing. We'll consider this the New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is the big holiday, kind of a capper on it. We'll say like Happy New Year for Yom Kippur, but it's almost after the fact. And we're busy. We're busy starving ourselves and feeling guilty for sinning and having to sit in a hot, sweaty synagogue. And the service goes all day long, all day long. So you could show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and you'll be there all the way into the evening. And another aspect of it, Jews celebrate holidays from sunset to sunset. So as the sun goes down on the prior day, that's when it starts. So the Sabbath, for example, technically begins on Friday night at dusk, and it continues into the next day until dusk. It's a sun thing. So the calendar is a moon thing, and the holidays are a sun thing, and that's how it goes. Right on. Now, one quick comment about this 5,787 business. And this is my segue, not that I did any prep here, mind you, to Hebrew school. So we've had some developments since the good old rabbi of the 2nd century CE, Rabbi Halafta, figured out that the entire planet was created in 3,000 years. Not only the planet, but the entire universe, 3,000 years. Now, since then, we've measured it using science in various ways. And the age of the universe, the whole shebang, based on multiple measurements from multiple angles in astronomy, cosmology, even physics, even quantum dynamics, the measurement of the cosmic background radiation, measurements of distant objects, supernova explosions. The list goes pretty long, and the number is consistent according to our current theories. And the real number is not, I know this is a newsflash and shocker to you, the real number isn't 5,787 years, so that's 13,800 million years. That's only, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 orders of magnitude difference. But that's a good guess, 5,787. It's absurd. Makes no sense. And I've read all of this garbage about every day of creation is actually a billion years and la-di-da. It's horseshit. It's a myth. It's a lie. It's Jonah in the whale. It's the plagues of Egypt. There's no archaeological, anthropological evidence that the Jews were ever even enslaved in Egypt, let alone that the goddamn universe is 5,787 years old. Now, the reason I'm coming down hard on this is because I had to take a lot of heat in, you guessed it, Hebrew school. Now, let me give a little context. My father was born in Budapest, Hungary, Budapest, March of 1928. The Germans rolled in to protect their eastern flank against the imminent Russian onslaught in March of 1944. So my father was sick, just turned 16 years old, and his life turned upside down, as did the life of all of my relatives in Hungary and those in the formerly Hungarian part of Romania, namely the Transylvanian Valley in northwestern Romania, where my mother and her family are from, both Jews. So everything turned upside down almost instantly toward the latter end of World War II. And it's astonishing that my mother and my father independently survived the Holocaust. The Jews, by any stretch of the imagination, got their asses kicked in a big way. And my family was part of that maelstrom. They emigrated independently, my mother and father, to Caracas, Venezuela, because visas were hard to come by. Immigration was highly restricted, even after World War II, especially after World War II. So the immigration traumas that we're feeling right now are nothing new. And even folks who demonstrably were fleeing for their lives couldn't really get into the States, namely my parents. Now, I won't get into the details of their emigration and then their secondary emigration together to the States. But the reason all that's relevant to this story is I hated Hebrew school. I couldn't stand it. I started, I think, in the third grade, and it went until I was 12, 13 years old for my bar mitzvah. 5 years. 5 years into the seventh grade, I had to go after school. School was out at like 3:30, and I think Hebrew school started at 4:30. And then it went until 7, if memory serves. 2.5, 3 hours, Monday through Thursday. I felt like my childhood was robbed from me. I grew up in ground zero of the Jewish experience in the American Midwest, Skokie, Illinois. And my father made me attend Skokie Valley Traditional High School, which was walking distance from my house, but it wasn't a short walk. It was close to 20, 25 minutes, I think. And Star Trek reruns were playing on Channel 9, WTTW Chicago at 7 p.m. I would miss my cherished Star Trek. I had to run home. This was a disaster. Anyway, a big reason not only did I hate Hebrew school, but just about everyone else who went, was not only the time suck, but that Hebrew school was basically managed and taught by Orthodox Eastern European Jews, what we would call the shtetl crowd. Not only were they literal in their interpretation of all this mythology and hocus pocus, but they insisted that we learn how to read and write Hebrew, which is not that big a deal because it's phonetic like Korean. You can learn it pretty fast, but because we didn't know what the hell we were reading and writing, and we would learn the prayers and the holidays and the mostly bullshit history by rote, year after year after year. And it cycled. I remember it was the same damn lessons year after year after year. So, what finally made me snap was when one of the teachers, and we all likened her to a Harry Potter Hogwarts teacher before there was a Harry Potter and a Hogwarts. She was about 4 feet something tall. I'm not exaggerating. And she was about as wide as she was tall. And she wore a wig in a flowery dress, oftentimes the same one. And she would bloviate day after day, week after week, year after year, the same stuff. And the subject came up. You guessed it. That the universe was 5,700 and something years old. And I was in the last row, all the way in back. I was kind of fat. I had glasses. In character, I was probably most like Eric Cartman from South Park. I was loud and brash. I thought I knew everything. And at that moment, I knew I was right, which is there's no damn way that the universe is 5,700 something years. So I raised my hand, and she knew what was coming. So she ignored me. And then I kept my hand in the air, and finally she got frustrated and she goes, Yehuda, what? That was my Hebrew name, Yehuda, which is Judah. I was Yehuda ben Moshe. Moshe is Moses. So I was Judah, son of Moses. And my father apparently was Moses, son of Judah. And apparently in our Spitz family, it alternated generation to generation. So Yehuda ben Moshe in the last row, looking and acting like the future Eric Cartman from South Park, raising his hand, finally gets the class's attention. And then I say, how could the world be, the universe be 5,700 and something years old when they found fossils of animals that have been carbon dated millions of years old? How could the fossils be there? And then she got red in the face, almost throwing herself into a literal fit. And she said, because God put them there. And that was it. I was done. That checked me the fuck out. But the classes continued. Week after week, month after month, year after year. I think that was halfway into this scourge. And then eventually time for my bar mitzvah came up and we went through all the motions. I got one of the most complicated and lengthy parshas or chapters of the Old Testament to read, Pinchas, which fell into the middle of the summer. It was basically an inventory of everything that the Jews apparently had with them in the desert when they were allegedly wandering around for 40 years. So the Jews allegedly escaped from Egypt, never happened. And then they were wandering around what's the equivalent of the Sinai desert right now, never happened. For 40 years, never happened. And they took with them a huge list of, I don't remember the exact thing, like 700 goats and 450 she-calves and whatever. And I had to list all this stuff out in Hebrew at my bar mitzvah, not really knowing what any of the words meant, and having to memorize each and every word, because Hebrew comes in two forms. There's the Hebrew with no vowels, Hebrew has no vowels, by the way. I think there's 17 letters, so no A, E, I, O, U. So imagine a language consisting of solely consonants. That's Hebrew. And if you want the vowels, they have little symbols that they put above and below, and sometimes within the letters. So 3 dots for eh, a line and a dash beneath it for aw or ah. And the trainer Hebrew, the training wheels Hebrew that we read were books that had the Hebrew with these little dots and dashes above, below, and within the letters, so that we could read it, we could phonetically enunciate each letter, and then we would have the vowels included. But the Torah itself, the Old Testament, written by hand on parchment, has 0 vowels. So you had to learn your parsha from these books where it reproduced the ancient Hebrew with no vowels. And then you had to learn how to sing it. There's a sing-song recitation that you also need to learn. So you need to learn each word, how you pronounce it. You need to learn the song or the melody that goes with it. And then you need to recite it out loud at your bar mitzvah. That's the primary thing that you do for getting bar mitzvah, becoming a man in Judaism. Usually for traditional and Orthodox. I think for the conservative or especially the Reform Jews might not be so stringent. And I don't know how it is now because years have gone by. But you get what I mean. It was excruciating for a 12-year-old to learn all this stuff, especially when it was so devoid of any meaning except rote memorization and then recitation. But that's what you did. That was the coming of age. And critics of me would say, why don't you just STFU? Because if you would have been receptive to it, you would have learned a bit of discipline and following rules and not become the ranting, raging, podcasting maniac and everything else you've become since. And that, dear listener, is a wholly valid criticism. So take everything of what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but it is corroborated by just about everyone who had to endure Hebrew school. And a few fun stories came out of Hebrew school. So it wasn't all a waste of time and a disaster. There were 2 friends of mine in Hebrew school, by the way. And we'll call them Howie and Aaron. And they worked at New York Bagel and Bialy, which is just up the street from Skokie Valley Traditional Synagogue on Dempster Street by East Prairie Road. And they worked at the Bagel and Bialy store, and every St. Patrick's Day, they made green bagels. And the thing about New York Bagel and Bialy, as is the case for all bakeries, is baked goods don't really last. If you bake it on a Tuesday, there's no way you could sell it on a Thursday, let alone even go for 24 hours. The stuff dries out. It's noticeably no good. But that said, a lot of places do anyway. So if they've got leftover bagels, they'll bag them, maybe resell them. I'm not saying anything disparaging about bagel places or bakeries, but the waste is astronomical, as it is in all food service. But the point here is that the following day, any leftover bagels were green. So it became self-evident what was left over. You couldn't fake it even if you wanted to or tried. So the day after St. Patty's Day at Hebrew school, we'll call them Howie and Aaron, they would come over with huge bags of green bagels that were discarded from the day before and use them as weapons in the hallway in the hot summer or super cold winter hallways with the cedar brick walls in the basement of Skokie Valley Traditional Synagogue became a war zone of flying green bagels. There's another incident where said pranksters went over to the local 7-Eleven or equivalent, and this was the day pre-digital, where dirty magazines were on the racks by Time Magazine and National Geographic, only they were placed behind a cardboard cover so you wouldn't see the covers because the covers were suggestive too. Playboy, Penthouse, Cherie, Oui magazine. And said the pranksters shoplifted a stack of Playboy magazines. And they skirted over to the synagogue and plastered them with tape, scotch tape, on the outside of the rabbi's office so that when 4 o'clock or so rolled around on Monday morning, trench-coated, fedora-capped, leather briefcased rabbi would show up, unlock the door of his office, open it up, turn on the lights, and facing him, scotch tape from the outside, was unfolded centerfolds of Miss January, February, March, April, May on the solar calendar, by the way. So stories like this made the entire experience almost, but not quite, worthwhile. Suffice to say that I was crushed. What do you do when you're a science geek? You can't wait to get home to watch Star Trek reruns. You're reading Isaac Asimov and you're trying to understand the world. You love math. You love everything that you're reading. And then you're subjected day in, day out to this old, tired, demonstrably false narrative. Now, as I mentioned, my father was a Holocaust survivor, and he was non-practicing. So he went twice a year, as I mentioned. He went for Rosh Hashanah, and he went certainly for Yom Kippur, and he had a membership so he could go Yom Kippur and send his one and only son to Hebrew school. Mission accomplished. And that sense of identity as having survived this tumultuous crisis of world history and the decimation of his own people was to instill in his son the traditions of the people. And again, you might be listening to this and throw counterpoint in my face, and you'd be right in your own way. Shut the hell up, Spitz. Your father was a good man. He went through hell and he wanted you to understand why. And he wanted to keep the religion alive in you. So you wouldn't be ranting and raging on a podcast decades later, but maybe you would raise your own children to believe in this stuff so that the religion wouldn't die, the tradition wouldn't die. And here's the clincher. 90% of our relatives who were machine gunned into the Danube, who were sent to labor camps and concentration camps, all of our dead relatives wouldn't have died in vain. And that's why you had to sit there. And that's why I had to learn all this hocus pocus, because it gave you a sense of duty and identity. And now clearly, I've blown it. My father's mission did not succeed. But then again, in a meta kind of postmodern self-referential way, it actually has. Because I've just spent more than half an hour ranting about this stuff. So it obviously still has meaning. It's made me who I am. And I'm thankful for all that. And I am at the end of the day and the beginning of the next one, very, very Jewish. I talk with my hands. As you can tell, I can't stop talking. I'm loud, I'm brash, all of these stereotypes, sure. But it's the kind of stereotype that you're like, yeah, we get it. I love the theater. I love literature. I love being creative. I'm bombastic. I'm impulsive. I could probably be another Seinfeld character. At the very least, a combination of Kramer and George. So, Dad, mission actually accomplished. It's been indelibly etched in my head. And I'm able to relate a lot of these stories and understand the context of everything from the ridiculous 5,787 to the rallying cry of our people announcing to ourselves that God is one and God is ours. And whether I agree with it or not, whether I have instilled in my own children this cognitive nonsense or not, emotionally, it's significant. And I come to understand the world and myself and even Israel better for it. So there you have it. Is identity important? Yeah, but in the sense of it being like the gold watch in Pulp Fiction, which is what makes that scene and that motif and that motivation for Bruce Willis's character so poignant and lasting and memorable and fun. The gold watch is ridiculous. It's bullshit. It's a hunk of metal. That hunk of metal went through a lot, and his relatives were put through a lot for him to have that heirloom. The heirloom in and of itself is meaningless, but meaning was put into it by want of the desire of the older generation to instill in the younger generation a sense of identity and tradition. And the most meaningful aspect of that paradoxical, hysterical, and self-referential gold watch story vignette in Pulp Fiction is that when the watch is left behind and Butch needs to go back to his apartment to fetch it because of his feelings about family and identity and loyalty and tradition, he puts himself in ridiculous harm's way he otherwise never would have, which in turn precipitates a cascading series of even more unlikely and astonishing events that culminate in his absolution and personal freedom. If he wouldn't have gone back for that watch, the bounty on his head would have no doubt continued. Marcellus Wallace would have found him and taken him out. And if that didn't happen, he would be living his life running and scared and paranoid. And going back to get that gold watch and the courage it engendered and the circumstances that resulted gave him the personal freedom to finally get closure and move on with his life. Awesome! But it's a perfect metaphor for this rant, too. Yes, I am Jewish. No, I don't believe in the Lord being our God and the Lord being one. If I believe in any transcendent kind of entity or deity, then it's one of mathematics and logic, the multiverse, endless permutation, and a multiverse or a reality capital R that we can't even begin to fathom, but we can use our imagination to get a taste. And it ain't anything like The hero Israel, Lord is our God, Lord is one bullshit that was crammed into my head. That said, however, there's a sense of mysticism and power, and yes, tradition and motivation and spirituality that underlie all of that nonsense. And in my ability to look back on it paradoxically and with irony and with humor, that is gold. And I'm thankful for that. And I want to take a moment to express gratitude. Gratitude to my mean old father who made me go to Hebrew school, even though I hated it. Gratitude to all my Hebrew school mates who had to endure that nonsense with me. Gratitude toward the indoctrinating, shtetl-headed, crazy people who taught those classes. And gratitude for the vicissitudes and chaos of existence itself that, if nothing else, creates and perpetuates wonderful stories that we can tell each other. Because at the end of any and every day, that's what I believe living and life is all about. And with that, Happy New Year! Whether you're Jewish or not, each and every day we renew ourselves. And yeah, maybe it's a good idea to spend a little time, if not atoning for your sins, then looking back at your life, trying to gain a little bit of objectivity and self-reflection, and try to do better next year. Try to do better tomorrow. What could possibly go wrong? Thanks for listening. Like, comment, share. Did I say it already? Happy New Year.